The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Chapter 6. Serious Suspicions. A Saturday in August, 1993.
Well, it's happening.
Lucius strode into the dining room, his robes billowing behind him. With a flourish, he dropped a copy of the Daily Prophet in the centre of the table, narrowly missing the platter of fried eggs and bacon. Draco yanked the platter back quickly. He was planning to have seconds. "What's happening?" Narcissa asked anxiously.
"He's assembling his army,"
Lucius said loudly. Draco froze. Were they talking about Voldemort? "Who exactly is assembling an army today?" Narcissa asked mildly.
"Richard, of course!"
Lucius began pacing the room, sweeping open the curtains, running a finger along the top of the mantel, nervous and jittery. "Not this again," Narcissa muttered under her breath. Draco scooped up the newspaper. "Sirius Black? Mother, isn't this your cousin?" He turned the newspaper to show her. She took it, shock clouding her eyes. "Yes, he's been in Azkaban for nearly your entire life. What's happened?" She scanned the article, clutching at the neck of her mourning robes. Lucius turned to face them, wild-eyed.
"What's happened is that maniac has escaped. He was in league as a secret agent with the Dark Lord many years ago, and now he is meeting back up with his handler. I imagine that Granger was in charge of him all those years ago, because I never saw Sirius at any meetings that I attended, just like I never saw Granger."
"But can two men really be classified as an army?" Draco asked reasonably, then shrank from his father's crazed gaze.
"It won't only be two men by the time they're done. As it is, I believe they have another in league with them, who is planning to teach at Hogwarts this very year."
"What do you mean, father?"
"Remus J. Lupin. Despite having a spotty employment history, Dumbledore has hired him as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. I don't know if Dumbledore is being bamboozled, or blackmailed, or both. And Lupin is a bit of a mystery. He was close with Sirius Black many years ago, and I have no doubt that the two of them worked for Granger on behalf of the Dark Lord to kill Potter and his wife. Now that Black has escaped from prison, and Lupin is at Hogwarts, something is afoot. The three of them are planning something, I know it!"
Lucius sat in his chair abruptly, summoning the teapot and sloshing half of it across the table as he caught it. Narcissa pursed her lips, but said nothing.
"I just wish I had answers! If they would let me in on the plan, perhaps I could help."
I'll see what I can find out, father," Draco promised. Later that morning, back in their bedroom, Narcissa brushed out her hair slowly at her vanity, whilst Lucius summoned several shirts, ties, and robes from his wardrobe, arranging them in a state of fitful confusion on the bed. He had had a hard time adjusting to losing his personal elf, Dobby. For all of Dobby's faults, seeing conspiracies where there were none, for example, he had had a good eye for fashion. Without him, Lucius could not be certain which shirt looked best with which tie, or which robe matched which shoes. Plus, Dobby always knew the correct temperature for his bath, and he plucked Lucius's eyebrows just the way he liked them. He really was going to have a hard time replacing that elf. "I really wish you would avoid bringing Draco into your conspiracy theories, darling," Narcissa began lightly. She clipped back a portion of her hair and began applying lotion to her face. "He's young. He's only 13, and he's very impressionable."
"He needs to know the dangers facing him. I believe he's getting closer to Granger's daughter, and now that we know the truth about her—"
"All we know is that she was adopted. I realize adoption isn't common among wizarding folks, but we don't know that isn't the case with Muggles."
"Narcissa!"
Lucius turned to face her in the mirror, his mismatched shirt and tie clashing horribly.
"What we do know is that this man is raising this child to be a warrior, a mercenary. And now we find out that she isn't even a blood relative of his. Say what you will, but anyone willing to go to the lengths that he is going for a child not even related to him, he means business."
She sighed. "Please, don't wear that shirt and tie together. You'll look sillier than Cornelius Fudge in his lime green bowler hat."
Lucius frowned irritably. "Thank you."
Narcissa finished her makeup and slipped on one of her favourite lilac robes. They were preparing to go into Diagon Alley for Draco's school shopping, and she wanted to look her best. She only wished that Lucius could see how silly all of this was. When he had first proposed the idea of the parent of a Muggle-born being a Death Eater, it had seemed laughable but not entirely implausible. After all, the Dark Lord himself had known much about the Muggle world, somehow. Once she met Richard Granger, she felt nearly certain that he was no threat. He reminded her a lot of the brother-in-law that she'd known for only a few years back at Hogwarts, Ted Tonks. A jovial boy, young Ted had been quick to crack a joke, coming up with puns and slapstick on the fly. She had voiced a hint of her doubt with Lucius when he brought it up in Diagon Alley, after he and Draco first met the Grangers, but her husband wasn't willing to listen. Then she met and got to know Linda. Linda was like a missing puzzle piece for Narcissa. Many of the questions that she'd had about Muggles over the years, both large and small, suddenly had answers. What did Muggles use to keep their hair curly without charms? What kept airplanes in the sky? And what exactly was a Tesco? Linda had promised to take Narcissa to one this autumn, and she was looking forward to it. So she allowed this charade to continue. She wasn't proud of it, but she did it anyway. Linda was different from the pure-blood witches she knew. Narcissa enjoyed her friendship with Linda, and she wasn't willing to give it up. And when Narcissa met Hermione, and then got to see how Draco spoke of her when he was home from school, one thing was clear. Narcissa wasn't the only Malfoy that enjoyed spending time with a Granger. Diagon Alley was crowded, as usual, when they arrived. New firsties with their parents, upperclassmen roaming in small groups, parents wrangling children too young for school whilst their older children shopped. The street was lively and boisterous despite the distressing news about the escape of Sirius Black. Draco and his parents found the Grangers peering over an extensive list of potions ingredients in Mr. Molepepper's apothecary. Draco focused hard on not staring at Hermione. He had only seen her up close once since she'd been petrified months before, and she'd avoided being too close to him for months before that. When they talked on the train at the end of school this past June, she'd been wearing robes over her Muggle clothing. Now she was dressed in a Muggle summer dress, in a buttery yellow colour with little flowers all over it. The skirt was short, a flouncy ruffle that skimmed and fluttered at the tanned expanse above her knees. The top was sleeveless, and dipped a bit lower in front, showing what was unmistakably a body far more developed than it had been a year before. No, he was definitely not staring. Lucius shook hands and bowed to Richard, and Richard, who had become accustomed to this, bowed back.
"Ah, Malfoys! Glad you found us. Quite the list of ingredients here, isn't it?"
"Yes. Professor Snape is always very thorough," Lucius agreed. He looked round for his wife, but she and Linda had walked away, looking at the beauty potions and lotions section further into the store. Draco had immediately latched upon to Hermione and was doing his best to fumble through a conversation with her across the room. He looked back at Richard. Lucius wanted more information about Hermione's parentage, but this could be his only chance to get answers about Black and Lupin, which was far more pressing at the moment, considering the news of the day. But before he could speak, Richard asked,
"Hey, how did the potion master please his wife?"
Lucius looked at the chemist counter, where the potioneer, old Mr. Molepepper, was compounding a medication, whilst his elderly wife wrote down charges in the ledger book.
"I confess, I don't know." "He licks her?" Richard grinned widely. Ah, yes. Elixirs can be quite helpful. Euphoria, calming, all good options. Listen, Granger, tell me, are you working with anyone? Anyone new or old, as the case may be? Well, we did hire a new bookkeeper at the practice, but her conflict skills are rather lacking. Conflict skills?
Lucius drew in a breath. He himself had not practiced dueling for a number of years. If Granger saw the need for battle skills, he might be in trouble.
Yes, when it comes time for collecting for services rendered, she's a bit of a softy. Tends to let some of the patients slide a couple of months. Oh well, I guess if we wanted to run a tight command, we should have hired General Ledger.
Legier was a major player at one time, but I'd heard he'd gone underground. Lucius could not be certain, but he was almost sure that Knott had once told him that Xavier Legier had escaped to France after the last Wizarding War and planned to stay there to avoid prosecution.
Richard smiled knowingly. Major player! Now you're getting it, Lou!
The Muggle man clapped him on the back, and Lucius struggled not to pull away from the man's dark mark, exposed so brazenly here in Diagon Alley. Long ago Death Eaters, Lucius thought. He only had a few moments before Narcissa grew tired of entertaining Mrs. Granger, and he wanted to discuss more urgent matters.
I wish to speak to you about Sirius, he said. Sirius about what? Richard asked in confusion. Not what. Who? Well, rather, where? Where is he? Who? Richard asked. Sirius. Seriously? I'm not certain of his middle name. It could be Lee, I suppose. Who? Black!
Lucius was growing more and more frustrated.
White! What? I'm talking about Sirius. Are you serious? Richard asked him with a knowing look. Surely you don't think I'm serious? Lucius retorted disbelievingly. To be honest, I'm not serious either, Richard said with a lazy smile, and don't call me Shirley.
Lucius stared at him for a moment. Richard was smiling, clearly enjoying toying with his prey. The Muggle man's eyes never left his own, and Lucius recognized the challenge within them. Don't call me out. Don't challenge my authority. Richard's look said, You will live to regret it, but you will only be alive to regret it for a little while.
I understand, Granger. My apologies.
We are going after this to get a new pet for me for my birthday, Hermione said, browsing the various dried roots in Mr. Mulpepper's. Would you like to come?
I would, but I need new school robes. My old ones are too short, Draco answered regretfully.
Yes, you've grown quite a bit taller in the last year, Hermione said, then immediately blushed. How embarrassing to point out that she'd noticed that. But when she glanced at Draco, she saw that he was blushing as well. The thought of this made her shiver a bit, though she didn't know why.
Cold?
He asked. A bit. It's nice out in the sunshine, but indoors it's a bit dreary, isn't it? Hermione ran her fingers along the backs of her arms briskly in an effort to warm them.
Here.
Before he could hardly register what he was doing, Draco was stripping off the ivory-coloured lightweight jumper he'd worn over his Oxford shirt, and offering it to her. Oh, no, I didn't mean—
Nonsense, Granger. You're cold, and I'm not. To be honest, I find it a bit stuffy in here.
Thank you, Hermione said. There was nothing for it. She was certain her cheeks were bright red now.
It's not a problem. Do you know what you plan to get for a pet? He said in an effort to change the subject.
I'm not sure. Perhaps an owl, although the school owls work quite well. And I'm afraid if I do get an owl, Mum and Dad might want to keep it. They loved the one that your parents loaned us a few years ago.
A cat, then?
Oh, I would love a cat. I've always wanted to have one, but Mum is allergic.
I see. And maybe a toad.
Ugh, no, thank you. I'm afraid if I get a toad, she might meet up with Neville's toad, Trevor, in the common room, and all of a sudden we would have an infestation. It would be like the 10 plagues of Egypt all over again. Hermione turned to face him, having selected her herbs and roots in the small shopping basket. I'm just not sure. Third years can have a variety of pets, so I'll have to see what strikes my fancy.
He smiled at her. Just not a locust.
She smiled back. Definitely not. Are we eating lunch together at the Leaky?
I think so. I look forward to seeing what you selected.
Hermione took a deep breath and tried to ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach at his words.
Is that a weasel, Granger?
Draco peered with uncertainty into the cage, trying to discern the breed of animal inside. No, it's a white ferret. They're very smart and social creatures. I think he would be a lot of fun to have around. Draco watched the irascible pink nose quiver and tiny pink feet scamper around the cage.
He seems a bit twitchy.
Well, Hermione said, picking up the cage and bringing it to eye level, smiling widely and talking in a baby voice to the creature. You might be twitchy too, if you had to live in that awful place with those great big things flying around everywhere. Owls and crows and ravens and falcons. You probably never got a moment's rest, did you, Houdini?
You named him Houdini?
No, I didn't. The woman at the magical menagerie did, I suppose. After the magician, I guess. She did say that he liked to hide sometimes, and she had trouble finding him.
The famous Houdini was a wizard, Hermione.
No, he was a...
She started, then thought for a moment.
Oh, well, that takes a bit of mystery out of it, I suppose.
Draco couldn't help but smile at her, slightly crestfallen expression.
Mum and Dad are nearly finished with lunch, Hermione said reluctantly. We'll be going soon. Here, let me give you your jumper.
She began to take it off, but he stopped her. It's all right. You hold on to it. You might need it again sometime. It was his cheeks now that coloured pink.
Thank you, Draco.
She gave him a quick hug, then hurried back to her parents. Yes, he was plenty warm, Draco thought. The start of the school year brought new subjects for the third-year students. Draco was now taking arithmancy, care of magical creatures, divination, and ancient runes, in addition to his subjects from first and second year. The year also brought a new and unexpected quirk, in the form of a ferret named Houdini. It was not unusual for Draco to open his trunk and find the white furball curled inside, or to pull back his duvet on his four-poster and spot the pink nose twitching from under his pillow. Granger, you really need to get a hold of your beast. Somehow he keeps finding his way into my dormitory. I cannot figure out how he's doing it,
Draco said in mock anger, as he delivered the wayward ferret to her table one day at lunch. Hermione only laughed. Well, that explains why he always smells like your cologne, she said, then flushed red in embarrassment.
Interesting, he thought. She recognizes my cologne.
Oh, I just realized how he's probably finding you. It's your jumper, she exclaimed.
What do you mean?
Well, I keep your jumper that you loaned me in Diagon Alley near my bed, hanging on one of the posts, you know. At these words, Hermione broke off in embarrassment.
Really, Granger? Draco smirked at her. Keeping me close in your mind?
Draco suddenly realized what he was implying, that this witch was thinking of him at night, in bed.
Oh, Hermione, no, I didn't mean...
I need to go to the library, she said, averting her eyes as she hurried away, her face burning. Houdini curled around her neck like a living scarf. They avoided each other for 3 days after this conversation, and then, as if by tacit understanding, pretended that it had never happened. But when one or the other of them happened to glance up and catch the other looking at them, whether it was across the great hall or the classroom, they both replayed bits of this conversation in their minds. Third year was shaping up to be the start of something interesting.
Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Muggle Death Eater by Great78.